Hi. Do you remember screensavers? I remember screensavers. When I was a kid with nothing but a Windows XP machine and a non-existent internet connection, the surreal worlds in these little toy applications captured my imagination in a way that nothing else could. So, as something of a love letter to those days, about a year ago I wrote my own screensaver for Windows. And by design, it's something of a sibling to those old pipe-building and cube-bouncing simulators, since it is built on the exact same tech. It relies only on the Win32 API and OpenGL, which have both existed since Windows 95. So hey, doesn't that mean it should just be able to run on Windows 95? Well, almost. If we just copy the program onto a Windows 95 computer, it doesn't work. My fatal anachronism was building the screensaver with a modern version of Visual Studio on a modern computer. This means that A, the code generated is targeting modern hardware, and B, the program relies on C and C++ runtimes for Visual Studio 2022. This was the main reason why the oldest version of Windows I could ever get it to work on was Windows Vista. It was the earliest I could go that still had support for the C++ runtimes that my version of Visual Studio used, and just barely. So if the problem is modern Visual Studio, the solution is ancient Visual Studio. If we can get a Windows 95 machine set up with an era-appropriate version of Visual Studio, then just compile our code with that, it should pop out a fully Windows 95 compatible version of the screensaver. And because we only depend on things that exist in Windows 95, this should be possible. Not only possible, but relatively easy. So hey, what do we have to lose? Let's port yokscr to Windows 95. Alright, first things first, we need our Windows 95 machine. For convenience's sake, let's just get a virtual machine going. Time to fire up good old reliable VirtualBox. Oh. Well, okay, Windows 95 doesn't work on a processor faster than 2 GHz, which is less than the average pregnancy test nowadays, but it's alright, we can just run this demonic-looking patcher to remove that CPU speed limit. Ah, good old Windows 95. It looks like shit. We're stuck in 16 color mode at 640 by 480. Normally I wouldn't care about that, but we are about to spend a good deal of time in old Visual Studio staring at code, so I really need all the screen real estate I can get. Plus, if we actually get this working, I would prefer to see it running with more than 16 colors. So let's install the VirtualBox guest editions to get ourselves a display driver and... oh, they don't work on Windows 95. Well, okay, some asshole on the internet says that this Sci-Tech Display Doctor thing works good in VirtualBox, so let's get it. And sweet, our whole system is bricked. Well, you know, maybe I deserve this for trying to virtualize Windows 95. WinWorld PC tells you not to do that, probably because running Windows 95 on a CPU 25 years newer than it makes it a little upset. So let's break out QEMU and switch over to full CPU emulation instead, for maximum compatibility. Oh fuck. Well, that's okay. Several people on the internet have reported successfully installing Windows 95 in QEMU and provided their configuration, all of which are totally different from one another and for decades-old versions of QEMU. Cool. Oh yeah, this is working great. God, I've been trying different Windows 95 versions and random config changes for hours at this point, and my efforts are really paying off. What the hell is going on here? I had success with this in the past. Okay, fuck this. I've never used it before, but apparently 86box is a better emulator for this kind of thing, specifically tailored for emulating old systems from the 80s and 90s. And yeah, look at this, you can cherry pick the exact hardware you want to emulate, down to the fucking IDE controllers. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I eventually stumbled through it, and... look at that. Glorious. I even have full color and adjustable resolution, just out of the box. Well, thank God for 86box, I didn't realize the hard part about this project would be just installing Windows 95. It's about time to get Visual Studio 97 on here, which is probably our best bet for compiling on Windows 95. Oh, you son of a bitch! After getting the code into my emulated machine, which was of course its own perilous process fraught with danger, I completely fucked up the file names, but that's easy enough to fix as I go along. The first thing to do is just try compiling it. Now, I said that in theory recompiling the code should just work, but we live in the real world where there is no Santa Claus, so that's not the whole truth. For one, it's possible that the APIs I am using have changed in incompatible ways in the, 30 years since Windows 95 came out. Microsoft is a true bastion of backwards compatibility, so we should be mostly safe, but even they slip up sometimes, and I'm absolutely terrified of what that would mean for us here. Second, while the code only relies on old-ass libraries, the code itself is written in a modern C++ standard, and as it is, it will not compile in Visual Studio 97. As far as I can tell, our geriatric compiler only supports C++ 98, when the idea of C++ being standardized at all was still relatively new, whereas my code takes advantage of features up to C++ 17. Yikes, that's almost 20 years of C++ improvement we're not going to be able to use. But we should be able to work through this. Even though I can't use new C++ features, these kind of language features don't unlock totally new worlds I couldn't already access with older C++ standards. Mostly they are just there for convenience, to make code safer and easier to read and write. Safety and readability don't matter to me here, we just need to get the damn thing to work. So that means I should be able to just try to compile my app, find where all the compiler errors caused by missing C++ features are, and rewrite the code causing the errors to do the same thing with old C++ features. So I started chipping away at the project file by file. Let's see here, the first file gives us about 50 errors. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's not reflective at all of the actual number of problems, since each error solved might solve a bunch of other errors, or introduce a bunch more errors. We have no way of knowing how much work this is going to be without just doing it. Now, I want this video to be at least a little digestible to a non-technical audience, so I'm not going to go over every single change I had to make. Suffice it to say, this was bad. It was way, way worse than I thought it was going to be. I was under the impression I wasn't using that many new features, and it should be relatively painless to rip them out, and I was dead wrong. Writing old C++ sucks. I don't know how anybody got anything done in these fucking dark ages. And of course, this is C++ we're talking about, so the error messages are designed by committee to be as cryptic and unilluminating as possible, so often the true problem would be very elusive. And I swear this compiler was on some shit. So, yeah, I don't really want to get into it, but I do need to talk about one of the changes I was forced to make, and that is standard array. I use standard array extensively in this codebase, but it wasn't going to exist for another dozen or so years until C++ 11. I decided to replace them with standard vector, figuring the two were probably close enough. Without getting into enough details to get me nerd-reacted on Discord, standard array represents a fixed-size collection of objects, whereas standard vector is variable size, able to grow and shrink depending on demand. I figured that as long as I never added or removed any elements from a vector, it would basically be the same thing as an array, a fixed-size collection. You can probably guess how this is going to end up, but let's just put it aside for now. Anyway, after approximately 87 years of painstakingly writing C++ 98 code, and I really want to emphasize again how fucking annoying this is, because this video cannot possibly do it justice, the end was coming into sight. All I had left were a few linker errors, which I was able to resolve pretty quickly, and soon enough... I have to turn audio on for this. We built it. We built it. It built. It's probably not gonna work though. Now, as past me said, we're probably not even close to done. I almost certainly lost some things in translation while rewriting the code, and there are almost certainly some incompatibilities in these old versions of the APIs, but why don't we just run it and see what happens? Well then, I wasn't expecting that. I thought I'd probably see the screensaver pop up for a moment then explode, but when you run the screensaver directly, at least from Visual Studio, it actually pulls up the settings dialog. And what a dialogue that is! Not only are all of our sliders missing, this dropdown is very shy, and the config values themselves are not being saved correctly. Oh boy. These sliders are worrying me the most. They're just gone. Does Windows 95 not support them? No, it looks like it should. They're there in Visual Studio's dialog editor, and I can even drag more of them on there. But even the new ones don't appear either. What? Alright, go Gadget Debugger. We're gonna get very used to using this thing, but luckily it works in basically the same way as it does in modern Visual Studio. This will let us step through the code line by line and make sure each one is doing what we expect. But unfortunately, I didn't really learn anything from doing this. Just that, indeed, the sliders do not even exist. I thought maybe I had some code that was doing something evil to them and blowing them up, but my code never even has the opportunity to touch them. They just aren't there. I got very stuck here for a while, until by total dumb luck, I stumbled into a Stack Overflow post of someone asking about the initialize common controls EX function. Wait, what? Initialize common controls? I have to initialize them? Yes, indeed. On Windows 95 in particular, common controls do not exist until you specifically ask for init common control sex. Oh, what about the combo box and the buttons? No, silly, those aren't common controls. Those are just commonly used controls. Got it? So, thanks to hitting the Google jackpot, our sliders are back. But something is still clearly messed up. This is probably related to the thing I noticed before about config data not being saved properly, so I looked into that next, and I'll just spare you the hour of bug hunting. It's right here. If you've done any C programming, you are probably putting your face through your desk right now, and all I can say is I'm just too used to type systems being able to catch these problems for me. Anyway, the shy dropdown was fixed pretty quickly by just finagling with the dialog editor, and before I knew it, we had a working config dialog. Hey, that actually wasn't too bad. I feel like we're getting off sort of lucky so far. But this means I can't really put it off any longer. We've got to try running the real thing. Well, with gusto. No, it knows they're illegal.
So, hopefully after seeing this...
Oh boy, that's not good. An illegal operation in the OpenGL library? This could be my worst nightmare come true, a sentient Windows login sound, an incompatibility in one of our libraries. If it turns out that one of the OpenGL functions is actually not implemented in Windows 95, or works in a significantly different way than it does in modern Windows, I may have to re-implement it myself, and depending on what function is failing, that could easily bring this project to a complete standstill. Worse, I had absolutely no indication where my code was failing. Like, damn, look at that stack trace, doesn't that just say it all? But I was not going to just roll over for this damn thing now. I've debugged worse, Windows 95. I've debugged worse. My first thought was that one of my OpenGL or Win32 calls was failing, returning a null pointer or some other invalid resource. Then I was passing that to another OpenGL function, which was then trying to use the garbage I was giving it and blowing up. But as I instrumented the code to add some error checking, nothing of that sort was happening. All of my calls were working just fine. I decided to look deeper into exactly where the crash was occurring by painstakingly going line by line until the program died. And that brought me into my own code. And it suddenly hit me what might be going on. This may have nothing at all to do with OpenGL. It may just be a classic case of memory corruption. If I was writing or reading from memory I wasn't supposed to, I could easily cause all sorts of awful things to happen, including errors in seemingly random places. Memory corruption sounds pretty damning, but this would actually be extremely good news for me, because it would mean the problem is in my own code, and therefore I can fix it. But where would I be corrupting memory? It had to be a result of a poor translation from new to old C++, because the modern version of the screensaver obviously wasn't doing it. And yeah, something peculiar was going on in the code that loaded the sprite's textures. I'm trying to figure out why we are getting an access violation here, and I've just noticed that the output iterator, for some reason, in copy is null. Which means that this is null, and that is completely terrifying. Hey guys, do you remember standard array and standard vector? A standard array is fixed size, so when you create it, it automatically allocates the space that it needs. But a standard vector, well, they're resizable, so when you create it, it doesn't know how big it needs to be. It has to wait for you to add data to it. And if you don't add anything, it's empty. Each sprite in the screensaver is a 128 by 128 image, which makes for about 16,000 pixels, and then each pixel is stored as a single byte. So, to store the texture data in memory, I made a standard array of bytes with a size of 16K, then copied the data from the texture file over it. I copied over the existing array. I did not add the data to the array. Now that's a big difference, because when I blindly replaced every standard array with a standard vector, I forgot to account for the fact that a newly created vector is empty. There's nothing in it to copy over. There's nothing in it to replace. That basically results in me copying memory to some random fuck-off location, and now memory corruption is starting to make a lot of sense. But since I had uncovered the source of this error, I could easily fix it, and try running the screensaver again. And... Oh no. Uh-oh. Okay, don't panic quite yet. I see it's trying to do a lot of dithering, so maybe I just need to give it more colors? Genuinely, I could not believe my eyes. It's working! Forget the part where it's running at 3 seconds per frame, it's actually working on Windows 95. I mean, I knew it would be possible, of course, but it was just such a long journey to get here, I almost forgot why I was even doing it. And while I wouldn't consider what we went through easy, we did get extremely lucky in this process. It is nothing less than serendipitous that there were only 1 or 2 API incompatibilities, and most of my problems were self-inflicted. I'd like to think that getting here was due to my awesome debugging skills, but really, we just got super lucky. So yeah, wow, that's yokscr on Windows 95. But, come on, we're not really done here, are we? Why does it run like that? Did I accidentally compile this with PowerPoint? Well, after applying some low-hanging optimizations and upgrading the hardware of our emulated machine, it was running much better, but still not great. That could be a side effect of emulation though, so hey, why don't we get these bad boys onto a physical machine? Problem is, I don't really have a physical machine that is comfortable running Windows 95. I mean, I do, but... yeah, if it chokes to death running fucking 3D Flower Box, then this screensaver is gonna melt its crusty 90s plastic into lava. The next oldest machine I have is a Dell Dimension 4600C from 2004, but it doesn't even have a floppy drive, which we need for installation, and even if we could get past installation, this machine never supported Windows 95 or even 98, so no graphics drivers for us. But we may be able to get around both of those problems. The first part of my plan is FreeDOS. Windows 95 requires a DOS environment to install, which we can normally only get through a floppy. But FreeDOS is a modern DOS-compatible operating system that can be installed via USB instead. Our computer supports USB booting, so let's install FreeDOS and then Windows 95 on top of that. Installing FreeDOS did not go smoothly. In fact, one of my attempts ended when I accidentally formatted the USB drive instead of the computer's hard drive.
Did I F-disk the USB? You've gotta be kidding me.
So yeah, moving on from that, we eventually get FreeDOS installed and are able to get Windows 95 going. We just need to light a pentagram of candles to get our CPU patch from hell installed, and we're good to go. But maybe you saw this coming, we have no drivers, so we're stuck in 16 colors and 640 by 480 again. But here's where the second part of my plan comes in, the Universal VBE Video Display Driver. This is a generic driver that uses BIOS extensions to provide high resolution and full color to graphics cards that don't otherwise have Windows 95 drivers. Hopefully it'll work on our machine. Well, fuck, I guess not. The computer would rather kill itself than use this driver. So yeah, it looks like it's not going to work. I mean, we can still boot into safe mode, I guess, and try a different version of the driver, but yeah, it's probably...
No way. No way did that actually work. What? What the fuck? I am a Windows 95 god. The Windows bends to my will. Why is it not restarting? You see what I fucking mean?
Alright, so by divine intervention, we have Windows 95 in full color and high resolution. Let's not waste this gift and quickly test out our screensaver before God taketh away. Yikes, that's not better at all. In fact, that's quite a bit worse than it was in the emulated machine. What the hell? Well, I guess this is kind of a hack driver anyway. Maybe I shouldn't expect it to be good. The website did say it didn't even provide hardware acceleration for OpenGL. So hey, one nice thing about compiling the screensaver for Windows 95 is that because of Microsoft's hardcore backwards compatibility, we should be able to run it on just about any version of Windows. This machine will be much more comfortable running Windows XP, it'll have proper drivers and everything, so how does it look there? Alright guys, the writing is on the wall. It just runs bad on old hardware, it's as simple as that. Now that makes it sort of a lame 95 screensaver, doesn't it? And from here, I'm not really sure where to go. Normally I would try to profile the code, figure out where it's spending all of its time, and try to make those functions more efficient, but I've already done that. I've spent the time on this, and the optimizations I can make to my own code are deep into diminishing returns. As far as I can tell, the crux of the problem is graphics. The more Yokis are on screen, the worse it gets, and the higher the resolution is, the worse it gets, quite quickly. I must be doing something extremely inefficient with OpenGL when drawing these sprites, but I'm not a graphics programmer or game programmer by any stretch of the definition. I just don't know how to optimize this kind of thing. And I think diving deep to figure out what I'm doing wrong is just out of the scope of this project. I did try one quick solution, which was to limit the resolution of the screensaver to something small like 800 by 600. It still looks fine, and in most cases it's buttery smooth compared to higher resolutions. Well, I tried. I struggled, and unfortunately I didn't capture any of the footage of me losing my mind over this, but I simply could not get this to work. I'm sorry. It genuinely feels like there's some bugs in the Win32 API as implemented by Windows 95. I'm still very salty I could not get this to work. It would have been a very elegant solution given the constraints of the project. So that's it. We ported the screensaver to Windows 95, but it's not at home there. And did we really learn anything from this? We found out that installing Windows 95 and using old C++ are both really painful, but I probably could have told you that without needing to do all this. But despite all of that, I know that this was worth it. I got to work on something that really matters to me. I wrote the first version of this screensaver right after finishing my undergraduate research at college and moving on to new pastures in life, and I'll never forget what it was like to pour hours of time and passion into this silly little thing, watching it grow from a simple OpenGL Hello World to a fully fledged screensaver. And I'll always cherish the moments I spent with friends working on it together to add new features. So no, it's not perfect, but we did do what we set out to do. And hey, if you want to take a crack at making this thing run better, the code is in the description, so feel free. I'm sure some of you out there know what you're doing more than me, and I'd love to learn something from you. Well, until then, this video is over. Thanks for listening to the whole thing. As I'm sure you can tell, unlike everything else on my channel, I actually put effort into this one. I have more ideas for effortful videos, I guess you could say, so stay tuned for those, and I'll see you next time.
It's just not something that I... Oh my god, it's too soon!